Breaking news coming down from the Parole Board on Canada's most notorious serial killer, Paul Bernardo, has been denied parole.
A bill to close safe consumption sites being fast-tracked through Queen's Park. Critics say the government's plans will lead to people dying in the streets.
And we'll have reaction to U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's threat to impose heavy tariffs on Canada.
This is Live at 5.
Good evening, I'm Bakari Savage.
And I'm Andrew Brennan. Welcome to Live at 5. Let's get to our top story.
And we're following breaking news. Parole has just been denied to convicted killer Paul Bernardo, serving a life sentence for the murders of 15-year-old Kristen French and 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey of St. Catharines in the early 1990s.
Now, he is 60 years old. Bernardo's been seeking both day parole and full parole for years now, or absences from prison to attend a program for sex offenders. We're going to be joined now by our crime analyst, Steve Ryan, in studio to help break down what this means. Now, Steve, we are again talking about Canada's most notorious serial killer, certainly in modern memory. And it seems like there may not have been a question of him being denied parole. Do you think that there was any chance he could have been denied parole here?
Not a chance in this world. And I can say that if he goes before a parole board for the next 20 years, he won't get denied parole. That's not the issue here from the feedback that I've been getting. What people are concerned with, and rightfully so, he has a right to apply for parole. He has that right under the Charter. It's the families having to be subjected to listening to him every 2 years. That's where the heartache comes in.
Well, just as we're thinking also on the implications here, victims were able to go into court and share impact statements, which was up in the air to begin with. So we've unfortunately had to hear from these poor young girls' families again.
Victim impact statements are a crucial part of our judicial process. It's the only time when families get to speak directly to an accused, to a convicted person rather, and tell them exactly what impact their crime has on their lives. So Debbie Mahaffey, she was able to attend in person, and she said in part, the biggest destruction of the peace and the joy and the hope in my life has been and remains Bernardo. Then she spoke to the board themselves. She said, I remain hopeful that you understand the sadistic, the manipulative, and the psychopathic nature of Bernardo's behavior and the endless threat he represents to the public. On that, his parole officer said, in part, Bernardo is overestimating his progress and underestimating the risk he presents. So that pretty much sums it up.
Okay, and you know, the families, they were almost robbed of that opportunity to have those victim impact statements. So when we come back in the next half hour, we're going to hear another statement and also about how this case not only changed the country, but the way that when you were an officer, the way that you all did these cases.
Yeah, for sure. We'll talk about how you treat what was viewed as minor sexual deviances, if you will, and how they have the potential to escalate into things such as what Bernardo was involved in.
Okay, CP24's crime analyst, thank you very much.
Turning now to the province, looking to push forward a bill that would close 10 supervised consumption sites in our province without any public consultations.
And for the latest details on the government's plan to fast-track the legislation, let's go live to CP24's Melissa Duggan. Melissa.
Yeah, and Bakari, this is just one of the latest initiatives being fast-tracked by the Ford government, fueling speculation. Once again, we might be seeing an early provincial election. So what happened here at Queen's Park, we're hearing from government leader Steve Clark putting forward a motion to fast-track this bill that was just tabled last week, by the way. And under it, what we're expecting are new rules surrounding the safe drug consumption sites in Ontario. So any of those sites within 200 meters of schools and of daycares, they have to close. Right now, that means 10 locations, 5 of them in Toronto, set to close by the end of March if this all goes through as planned. So by fast tracking this, what we're seeing is going from second reading straight to third. And that means no going to the public, no committees being held, no amendments being suggested. I want to share more of what we're hearing from Clark today. Have a listen.
The government made their point very clear at the Association of Municipalities of Ontario conference about that we were moving to the hard hub model. The government said at the time that the minister would be tabling a piece of legislation. In this case, it was Minister Kirshner that included what Minister Jones communicated to all 444 municipalities. I said here in the legislature that there are some bills, and this is one of those bills, that the government needs to get passed. So going back to August, we communicated to municipalities this was something we were going to move forward on.
So the government also expected to open several of heart hubs, is what they're calling them, that will offer different resources to people who are using drugs, being able to connect them with the rehabilitation, also jobs, that kind of thing. But it won't have the supervision of healthcare officials looking at people as they're using drugs, being able to intervene if there is an overdose. They also won't be providing clean needles and also won't be collecting them either. And those two things, two of the issues that we've been hearing about harm reduction workers really saying that is among their greatest concerns about seeing these sites being closed across the province. We're also getting some criticism from the opposition. Here's a little bit of what Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie had to say today.
I feel very strongly that the committee, the Premier, the government needs to hear from regular people and their experiences. I have firsthand experience with addiction issues, and when we were having these discussions in the city of Mississauga, I was approached by groups of parents and mothers in particular that felt that safe consumption sites may have ensured that their child would have been alive today.
So under this bill, we are expecting these 10 sites across Ontario, 5 of them in Toronto, to be closing by the end of March. And something else to mention, too, it also closes what the province is calling a loophole. So community groups could look to the federal government for their approval, for their funding to open these supervised drug consumption sites. But under this bill, the province is saying no, that they would have to go to the province for this, that they would not allow that to happen. And we're also hearing from Ontario's Health Minister Sylvia Jones saying that under this government, they will not allow any further safe consumption sites to open. Back to you.
And that's Melissa Duggan reporting for us. We appreciate you, Melissa. And as this bill gets fast-tracked, we know with a majority it will likely be so.
Right now it's 5:08, 4 degrees, feeling like 1 below zero. Let's get a check on the roads with traffic specialist Adjoa Insiaya. As people are on the move, just like the temps.
They are on the move, just like the temps, but it's not too chilly if you're in your car and your heat's up, because if you're out there on the major roads, I do have a bit of good news to warm you up. So this is on the Toronto-bound lanes of the QEW, the ramp that does take you to the 403 at the Oakville end. We had a collision at one point. All lanes on that ramp were blocked. MTO just zoomed out their camera, so at least those problems did all clear. If your travels take you on to the 401, this is the eastbound 401 at the end of the on-ramp from James Snow Parkway. Just a stalled vehicle that does have the right lane blocked. MTO was reporting problems on the 401 westbound in the Express just through Don Mills. Reports of a collision in the center lane. Haven't spotted it yet. Once I do, I'll definitely keep you in the know. And the Don Valley Parkway barely moves this hour. It is rush hour 2 to be expected. Delays extend now from approaching Bayview Bloor all the way up towards the 401. I'll send it back to you, Bakari and Andrew.
This CP24 traffic report is brought to you by 407 ETR. Enjoy the journey with a stress-free commute.
As always, thanks very much, Adjoa. Turning now to a worker sent to hospital after an industrial accident downtown this morning.
It happened at a construction site. This was on Richardson Street near Lord Jarvis in Queens Quay just before 11:30. So Toronto Fire says that a worker was injured in a construction pit and had to be extricated. Paramedics tell CP24 the man in his 20s was taken to a trauma center in stable condition.
A wall had collapsed onto an individual in the pit. He received some severe injuries. The first aid crew started mitigating first aid right away. We called in for our rescue squads and their support trucks in to help remove the patient out of the excavation area in the pit. It was about 40 feet deep.
And the Ministry of Labour has been notified and is to be investigating.
Well, the province's police watchdog is investigating a crash in Scarborough. This sent 6 people to hospital.
Indeed. We heard of a Honda CR-V colliding with an Audi before striking a bus shelter near Brimley in Eglinton last night, around 10:30 p.m. Now, the SIU, the Special Investigations Unit, says police had been following the Honda after observing it speeding while performing a traffic enforcement operation. Now, police confirm the Honda was stolen. Paramedics say 4 teens that had been traveling in the stolen car were taken to a trauma center for treatment. The SIU says 2 people in the Audi were also taken to hospital.
An early morning shooting in Etobicoke. It led to a rather big traffic tie-up. This is on the 401, and it happened for several hours.
A man found with a gunshot wound near the Martin Grove on-ramp. That's at Dixon Road around 7 this morning. Now, police say he was taken to hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. The search for a suspect led police to shut down the eastbound 401 collectors near Dixie Road for several hours.
And a Burlington woman has been charged in a fraud scheme involving Taylor Swift tickets.
Yeah, this is one of those talkers, Bakari. According to police, these tickets for Taylor Swift's shows in Toronto that just wrapped up were advertised on Facebook Marketplace. People thought they were getting a good deal. Victims paying for tickets, but on the day of the concert, the tickets weren't transferred, and then they asked for their money back, police say. They were told it was gone. 28 victims already have come forward. Police say a total of $70,000, at least thus far, was lost. Denise Tesor, who went by the alias police say Denise Blackhawk online, is facing several charges, including fraud and possession of property obtained by crime.
It's alleged that she was on social media platforms such as Facebook Marketplace, using an alias, Denise Blackhawk, and offering tickets for the Taylor Swift concert in Toronto. The Toronto Police do believe that there may be more victims out there, and we are working with Halton Regional Police Service on this ongoing investigation.
Okay, so again, adding to that, Toronto and Halton Police, they are working together. They believe that there may be more victims.
It's 5:12 right now, 4 degrees outside, but feeling like -1. This is Live at 5.
Donald Trump talking tough on tariffs. Coming up, how Canada is responding to threats south of the border.
Welcome back. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump threatening to impose even heavier tariffs on Canada. This is in a move to potentially do billions of dollars in economic damage on both sides of the border.
Okay, for the latest, let's go to the newsroom. This is where CP24's Phil Perkins is live. Phil.
Bakari, Andrew, that's right. 25% taxes on everything that America brings in from Canada and Mexico if our 2 countries don't figure out border security, mainly when it comes to the movement of illegal drugs, particularly fentanyl, from Canada into the U.S. and people illegally going from Canada into the U.S. The same goes with Mexico. If we don't get that figured out, Donald Trump pledging that he will put down this 25% tax January 20th. Now, we understood from Justin Trudeau's office telling CTV News yesterday, within hours of Donald Trump putting this out on Truth Social, that the Prime Minister and the President-elect had a chat, had a phone call. Apparently, it went well. Today in Ottawa during question period, the Prime Minister reiterated that, saying that he spoke with the President-elect, saying they talked about border security. They also talked about the economy and protecting workers on both sides of the border. Now, again, if these tariffs were to kick in, this would be a massive hit to the economies to the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. But between our 2 countries in particular, over $960 billion of total trade back in 2022, and over 3.3 million jobs rely on exports alone. And the market's already reacting to some of this. The Canadian dollar dipping to below 71 cents U.S. earlier today. It's trading around 71 cents right now. So obviously everyone in Ottawa getting all their ducks in a row, trying to figure this one out. Here's Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland and Pierre Poilievre. Here's what they have to say.
I think the important conversation is the conversation that the Prime Minister had with the President-elect. Of course, there have been a lot of conversations that I've had, that other colleagues have had with American business leaders, with American elected officials. So we have been talking to them intensely since before the election. After the election, we'll continue to do that. But truly, it's very meaningful that the Prime Minister was able to speak to the President last night, shortly after the President's announcement. That's the key relationship.
Canada first. Let's put it this way. One, I only care about Canada. I want to put our country first. Two, America is responsible for over 60% of our trade. We trade more with the U.S. than we do with the rest of the world combined. I will do what is necessary to preserve and protect that relationship above all others.
Now, clearly, Ottawa is going to be having meetings. Prime Minister Trudeau is going to be having meetings with Premier starting tomorrow, Premier Doug Ford, taking this pretty personally. He said that this announcement, this pledge from the president-elect felt like a family member stabbing you in the heart. Back to you two.
Bill Perkins, we appreciate you. And let's not forget the emergency session tonight in Ottawa from the House of Commons. A lot to deal with there, too.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, right now, let's take a look at local reaction to Trump's proposed tariffs plans. For that, we go live to CP24's Arda Zakarian, who's been working on this story. Arda, what are people saying?
Well, I've been speaking to people who've been grocery shopping and doing some Christmas shopping as well. And they've been saying that they're worried. They're very worried if this comes into fruition. However, some other people are saying this is possibly just a tactic. We had a chance to speak to Dan Kelly earlier. He's the president and CEO of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business.
I think the important conversation is the conversation that the Prime Minister had with the President-elect. Of course, there have been a lot of conversations that I've had, that other colleagues have had with American business leaders, with American elected officials. So we have been talking to them intensely since before the election. After the election, we'll continue to do that. But truly, it's very meaningful that the Prime Minister was able to speak to the President last night shortly.
This is a big worry for small businesses. We are deeply concerned about the prospect for some tariffs, but we need to keep our heads about us. We can't start to run around screaming and panicking and threatening retaliatory action. We've got to stay calm and confident about how Canada can be an indispensable trading partner with the United States. We have tons of resources that they need, and this would hurt them just as much as it would hurt Canadians.
And he says that Canadians are going to have economic challenges. As for how it's going to impact us, it started already, our loonie dip down. Back to you.
Arda Zakarian, thanks very much. We appreciate the local reaction as well.
Right now it's 524 degrees, feeling like 1 below zero outside. This is Live at 5.
Coming up, Sheridan College and again suspending programs, reducing more staff. We'll tell you why next. Welcome back. Sheridan College is suspending 40 programs and reducing staff amid the government's international student cap.
Yeah, the school says that impacted programs include those in the faculties of animation, art and design, applied health and community studies, humanities and social sciences, applied science and technology, and Pylon School of Business. Sheridan, which has campuses in Brampton, Mississauga, and Oakville, says some suspensions will go into effect as early as May. So earlier this year, Ottawa announced that it was reducing the number of international student permits in response to the housing shortage and cost of living. Well, the city is celebrating the start of construction on a new transit-oriented housing project.
Mayor Olivia Chow helping to break some ground, the shovel out, as you can see, this morning near Wilson Station, actually basically right across the street. It is a former commuter parking lot, but when complete, the complex is expected to have nearly 1,500 homes, including more than 500 affordable rentals.
This site, for many, and Councillor Passner said to me, it's been 5 years in the making. It was known as the housing never, but what a change. It is housing now. We are building now, finally. Congratulations.
This has not been an easy journey, but in the end, we will see over 1,000 people living in affordable rental units when this construction project is complete. This gives opportunity, peace of mind, and security of tenure, ensuring that young families, single persons, and seniors have the opportunity to remain in Toronto, to live steps from a subway station, enjoy a new park and daycare, and the multi-purpose space that will all be built here.
And speaking of being built there, construction for the affordable and market rental homes, well, that's expected to begin first in the spring, and the first residents to move in by 2029.
It's 5:24, 4 degrees, feeling like 1 below zero outside. This is Toronto's breaking news, CP24.
And coming up in a few minutes, we have an update from Pearson on how we plan to deal with winter travel. Coming up. Officials at Pearson Airport are giving an update ahead of the travel season. Their duty manager, Andre Nadeau, says numerous improvements have been made this year.
Our goal is really to do everything faster, better, and safely. So big word for us is do safely. It was already mentioned, training starts in the summer. Whenever we're still getting thunderstorms, we're starting to train for the snow tactics for the winter. All the decisions that are made on the day of, it's in collaboration with the airlines, Ken and Todd's team, Nav Canada, the ground handlers. There's a whole team that's behind the decision making on how we're going to do this snow event.
And along with that, Pearson says it has new loaders, de-icing equipment, and high-capacity snow blowers for the upcoming season. Officials say preparation started in August, with dozens of new workers being brought in. The crews are aiming to have runways cleared in 15 minutes this winter.
5:28 and feeling like -1 out there. You're watching Live at 5.
And breaking news coming down from the Parole Board on Canada's most notorious serial killer, Paul Bernardo. He wanted to be a free man. More on this next.
Breaking news coming down from the Parole Board on Canada's most notorious serial killer. Paul Bernardo wanted to be a free man. Will he be? We will tell you.
And a bill to close safe consumption sites is being fast-tracked through Queen's Park. Critics say the government's plans will lead to people dying in the streets.
And we will have reaction, local and abroad, to U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's threats to impose heavier tariffs than we thought on Canada.
This is Live at 5.
Hello, I'm Andrew Brennan.
And I'm Bakari Savage. We continue our coverage this hour. And we're following breaking news. Parole has just been denied to convicted killer Paul Bernardo. Bernardo had been serving a life sentence for the murders of 15-year-old Kristen French and 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey near St. Catharines in the early 1990s.
The now 60-year-old had been seeking either day parole or full parole or absences from prison to attend programs for sex offenders. Now let's bring in our crime analyst, Steve Ryan, joining us once again here on our CP24 studio. Just looking at the impact that this had on the families, Steve. You mentioned one family and how this destroyed them. We heard from both, and it was even a challenge for them to get to the parole board or even to be heard by the parole board this time around.
Yeah, that's right. And that's because last week the parole board said that the families couldn't attend in person. That decision was switched, and only the Mahaffey family were able to get there in person. But we did hear victim impact statements from both families. Donna French gave hers remotely, and she said in part, and this might be hard to listen to for some of our viewers, so just be forewarned. It has been more than 32 years since my daughter Kristen was abducted, sexually assaulted, and beaten to within an inch of her life, tormented, humiliated, and murdered, then dumped by the roadside like a piece of trash. They say time heals all, but I don't for a minute believe that, for I have not healed. So that was very impactful. And just to add on top of that, in part, the parole officer that supervises Bernardo said that Bernardo is overestimating his progress and underestimating his risk to that he presents to the public. So that sort of sums up the whole theme behind what went on today.
Okay, so again, parole was denied. Bernardo, he applies for this because he has a right to do so.
Yep.
See, let's talk about the impact that this case has had on the country, but also let's go one step further because this all happened while you were still a detective. Talk about how this changed policing as well.
So Bernardo was convicted in the early 90s of these heinous crimes. And what was learned was that Paul Bernardo started out as a voyeur. He started out committing indecent exposures. Those crimes were looked upon as nuisance crimes. I was a young detective constable when we went through some of our investigative training in the early to mid-90s, and we were taught at that time that these crimes could be the gateway to more serious sexual assault offenses. So these crimes need to be investigated thoroughly, and people like that need to be put before the courts so that they can be assessed and evaluated on the off chance that they may wind up escalating their need to commit these sexual offenses.
And then overall, the impact on the country in general.
Yeah, you and I talked earlier, and it's not hyperbole when I say we lost some of our innocence as a country when these young women were brutally murdered like they were. It was something that we really hadn't heard of that often in Canada, and this really knocked everybody back.
Okay. CP24's crime analyst, Steve Ryan.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay.
Turning now to the province, looking to push through a bill to close 10 supervised consumption sites without any public consultations.
And for the details on the government's plan to fast-track the legislation, let's go live to CP24's Melissa Duggan. Melissa.
Yeah, Bakari. So this is a story we've been following since the summer. That's when we heard from Ontario's health minister saying that the province was planning to close these 10 sites, 5 in Toronto, because they're within 200 meters of schools and of daycares, and also including something in this bill, too, that would prevent future safe drug consumption sites to be allowed to open in Ontario. Now, last week, this bill was tabled, and today the big update is just the speed at which this is going. We heard from Ontario's government House Leader today, Steve Clark, putting forward a motion that would see this bill move faster. So it would go from second reading to third reading without public consultation. I want to share more of what Clark is saying today.
The Minister of Health was very clear in August about our heart hubs. She was very transparent to municipalities that when the House came back, we were prioritizing this as legislation we needed to get passed as a government. So as early as the middle of August, we telegraphed our intentions, and I sat here a couple of weeks ago and told you that I'd be using time allocation on some of the government's bills. This is a government bill we need to get passed.
But what we've been hearing from harm reduction workers since this idea came forward from the provincial government is that it is going to cost lives. They're saying without these safe drug consumption sites, they don't have healthcare workers that are overseeing people using drugs. They're not able to intervene if there is an overdose. They're not able to give them things like clean needles, which they say does save lives in the long run. Yes, they want people to be in rehabilitation, but the wait times for that, that's a long time. What are you going to do in the meantime? A little while ago, I was talking with Lorraine Lamb. She is an outreach worker, someone who is on the front line, and she's sharing some of her concerns. Here she is.
You know, it's really clear that they're trying to push this through without public hearings because they know it's a reckless and dangerous decision. It goes against their own staff reports that recommend scaling up the services instead of shutting them all down. You know, if I had an opportunity to speak to government about this, my question would really be, well, what are you really doing to address people's actual wellness and safety? They say that closing these sites are going to be, you know, the pathway to what they call recovery. But truth of the matter is, I think it's a very narrow-minded scope in terms of what's actually going to happen. Closing down the sites is not going to stop drug use in the same way that if you take tents from a park away, homelessness still exists. So what is the long-term plan here?
Now, this bill is expected to get the green light here at Queen's Park. And once it does, we are expecting these 10 sites that have been earmarked to close by the end of March. Back to you.
Queen's Park, CP24's Melissa Duggan. Melissa, thank you.
Well, it's 5:37 and always a good time to check on how the roads are doing with our favorite
You're both my favorites, too. Yeah, you know, feelings mutual. But we are dealing with problems which aren't going to give people the warm and fuzzies. A couple of problems that are happening for your drive home. It's rush hour, always slow, but in the mix on the westbound lanes of the 401. This is happening in the express through Kennedy. Right lane and shoulder blocked following the stalled vehicle. Flashing lights are the telltale sign as you try to make your way home. And then eastbound on the 401, this long-standing stall, it's right at the end of the on-ramp from James Snow Parkway. It is that right merge lane that is occupied. We had some problems, and I think they're just right here. This is the southbound 427 exit ramp that takes you to the Queensway. Looks like the two right lanes are blocked at the stall. Hard to tell because a lot of these cars are stopped at a light. But some good news, because I'm not always the bearer of bad. Outside of camera view on the Niagara-bound QEW, just at the 427, we were dealing with some problems in the right lane. They just drove away. I'll send it back to you both.
All right, thanks a lot, Adj.
You're welcome.
Well, a worker was sent to hospital after an industrial accident downtown this morning.
Yeah, it was reported at a construction site at Richardson Street near Lower Jarvis and Queens Quay. Roughly 11:30 this morning, Toronto Fire saying a worker was injured in the construction pit and had to be extricated, with paramedics saying the man in his 20s was taken to a trauma center. He's in stable condition.
These guys are pretty safe, and they actually kind of watch what they do, and this is probably a one-off for an accident. So, I mean, most construction sites are busy following all the safety rules and regulations and making sure they're behaving in the right, proper manner.
And the Ministry of Labor has been notified.
And turning now to other news, the province's police watchdog is investigating a crash in Scarborough, which sent 6 people to hospital.
A Honda CR-V collided with an Audi before striking a bus shelter near Brimley and Eglinton around 10:30 last night. The Special Investigations Unit says that police have been following the Honda after observing it speeding while performing traffic enforcement. Police confirmed the Honda was stolen. Paramedics say 4 teenagers had been traveling in the stolen car. They were taken to a trauma center for treatment. The SIU says 2 people in the Audi, they were also taken to hospital for assessment.
An early morning shooting on the opposite side of the city in Etobicoke, leading to a big traffic tie-up on the 401 for hours.
A man was found with a gunshot wound. This is near Dixon Road and Martin Grove Road just before 7 this morning. Police say that he was taken to hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. The search for a suspect led police to shut down the eastbound 401 collectors near Dixie Road for several hours.
You're watching Toronto's breaking news, CP24. This is live at 5.
Donald Trump is talking tough on tariffs. Coming up, how Canada's responding to threats south of the border. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump is threatening to impose heavy tariffs on Canada in a move that could do billions of dollars in economic damage.
And we've been hearing reaction both sides of the border. Let's bring in our own Phil Perkins from our newsroom. Phil, we've been hearing from levels of government. We've been hearing from the opposition leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone's speaking out on this. Seems like Ottawa is just buzzing right now with reaction to President-elect Donald Trump announcing yesterday on his own social media platform, Truth Social, saying that if Canada and Mexico don't tighten up their own borders when it comes to the illegal flow of drugs, particularly fentanyl, and the illegal movement of migrants, that he will slap down a 25% tax on both of our countries come January 20th. As I mentioned, Ottawa has been reacting pretty swiftly. Trudeau's office telling CTV News that within hours of Trump making this pledge that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was on the phone with the president-elect. Apparently the conversation was, quote, good. Tonight, there is going to be an emergency debate in the House of Commons. Already, during question period, there was a good back and forth between Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre and Justin Trudeau. And also, there's going to be an emergency meeting tomorrow between the Prime Minister and the Premiers as well. So, let us hear right now from Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc and Premier Doug Ford.
We totally understand the American concern around the security and integrity of the border. It's a concern that obviously Canadians share. The Government of Canada has exactly those same concerns. And the good news is that for decades, this collaborative work happening literally daily with American authorities and Canadian authorities has allowed us to keep both countries safe.
A message to President-elect Trump: there's no closer ally, there's no other country in the world that has stood shoulder to shoulder with our American counterparts, our friends, our family. It's an insult to the 900,000 Americans that are living here in Canada It's an insult to the 9 million Americans that wake up every single morning to produce products to ship up to Ontario alone.
Obviously, this will have a massive trickle effect on both sides of the border, really. Over $960 billion total in trade between Canada and the U.S. back in 2022. 3.3 million jobs relying on the exports alone. And so this is going to be a pretty massive deal. We'll see what happens out of these talks today in the House of Commons and then tomorrow between this meeting between Prime Minister Trudeau and the premiers. Back to you two.
Okay, live from the newsroom, CP24's Phil Perkins. Phil, thank you.
No problem.
So we got the political reaction there, but there's so much more to this story. There's the economic impacts, talking about billions of dollars that are at play here. But on top of that, there's also a question of how this will just mean for people's pocketbooks. Let's bring in our own Arda Zakarian to help us with that.
Andrew, I've been speaking to people in parking lots when they're grocery shopping, Christmas shopping, and it's clear that people are concerned. And so the people have said, a couple of people that I spoke to said that they are concerned that tariffs are going to affect them. One person actually said that he views it kind of as a threat, that it might not really happen, or a tactic rather, that he's just saying this to get some sort of reaction from the other countries that are involved. So we're yet to see if this threat actually materializes, because it was just something that President-elect Donald Trump said on social media. It's not set in stone just yet, but we are seeing some of the effects happen already as our loonie dipped down. Back to you.
CP24's Arda Zakarian getting local reaction for us live. Arda, thank you very much for your hard work. We appreciate it. Right now it's 5:47, 4 degrees, feeling more like -1. This is Live at 5.
Turning now to the Levant, a ceasefire deal reached between Israel and Hezbollah set to take effect tomorrow. What could this mean for the rest of the region? Details coming up.
And a ceasefire deal has been reached between Israel and Hezbollah, set to take effect tomorrow.
And we heard inklings of it earlier on in the day. U.S. President Joe Biden making the announcement that it was good today, that fighting across Israel and the Lebanese border will be ending at 4 a.m. local time. This comes after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he would recommend to his cabinet to approve the proposal for a truce.
Let me be clear. If Hezbollah or anyone else breaks the deal and poses a direct threat to Israel, then Israel retains the right to self-defense, consistent with international law. Just like any country, when facing a terrorist group pledged to that country's destruction.
And the ceasefire agreement does not affect Israel's offensive against Hamas in Gaza.
We're going to go back to one of our top stories, and we will be talking about this till January 20th. We're going to get reaction now to Trump's proposed tariff plans, which seem to be changing. We're joined live now by Giles Gerson. He is the president and CEO of the Toronto Regional Board of Trade. Now, Giles, just to start off with, I think the biggest question is how could this impact us here? Because and also likewise, going and having our goods being sold south of the border. We don't know if Canada will retaliate, but even it seems some Americans don't know what a tariff is by this point, and some goods from Canada may ultimately end up being more expensive.
Well, in fact, that's right. I mean, in part because, if you take the auto sector, for example, we manufacture cars in Canada. The U.S. manufactures cars. The components go back and forth. Often you'll find an automobile made in Windsor or in Ingersoll, Ontario, or up in Cambridge. You'll find that it has many parts from the U.S. and certainly cars made in the U.S. have parts from Canada. So if the United States applies tariffs, which is basically like adding a tax to Canadian products flowing south, a 25% tax. We pay the HST here, right? So imagine a 25% tax on those products. It's going to make those products more expensive. So if I'm manufacturing automobiles, airplanes, food products in the United States, and I rely on Canadian inputs, Canadian products as inputs, as supplies, and those products go up by 25%, I'm going to look elsewhere, most likely. I'm going to look for other suppliers, probably in the United States. So the problem for Canada is that our companies are going to find themselves losing their customers. And since 77% of Canadian products flow south to the U.S., that's where we export to mostly. The loss of those supply contracts means ultimately potentially the loss of thousands upon thousands of jobs. And so it could be pretty devastating if the United States follows through with that.
Okay, so what did you actually think when you first heard about this, especially with respect to, whatever happened in NAFTA and, moving forward with our relations?
Well, it was a bombshell. I mean, President-elect Trump had talked about a 10% tariff, and even that would be a violation of the Canada-U.S.-Mexico Free Trade Agreement. But here was a 25% tariff announced last night on social media, on Truth Social, and that is devastating. And people talk about how this is going to be applied to Mexico and China with an additional 10%, so 35% tariff on China. But we've got to remember that Mexico is a much lower cost producer than Ontario, than Canada is, and so is China. And in fact, in many ways, those two countries have made a meal out of the United States market over the last 15, 25 years. And we, in Canada, we've lost market share in the U.S. So it's kind of interesting that we're getting hit with the same tariff, the same retaliatory tariff that Mexico and China are being hit with, when in fact we're not really the problem at all. And so that was the bombshell, was that we were being hit with that kind of tariff, which is devastating if it comes to pass, because we're a higher cost economy. Our companies can't afford to absorb a 25% increase in their cost on their products flowing into the United States. And so we've got to negotiate now. We've got to try to eliminate this threat between now and mid-January, or January 20th, when inauguration takes place, or shortly thereafter, in order to make sure this does not happen. It would be catastrophic.
Well, you said we may not be the problem, Giles, but it could be a problem for us in months to come. Giles Gerson, we appreciate your time, President and CEO of the Toronto Region Board of Trade.
Thanks a lot, Giles.
Thank you.
And right now it's 5:55, 4 degrees. This is Live at 5.
And coming up, a call for help for Giving Tuesday.
Food Banks Mississauga and Canada Helps are putting out a call for help.
Yeah, Food Banks Mississauga is saying they're experiencing an unprecedented surge in demand. We've been talking about this before, and it's gotten worse. 1 in 13 Mississaugans now relying on food banks. Now, this being officially declared a food insecurity as an emergency earlier this month at Mississauga City Hall. The food bank saying that this is the fastest growing user, being single adults with rents eating up most of their monthly income.
On Giving Tuesday, you can visit CanadaHelps.org, which is Canada's go-to destination for online fundraising and donating. And you can search out any of the 85,000 plus registered charities in Canada and make a donation to them on the spot online. And you will get your tax receipt instantly. So it's probably the easiest and most simple way to give.
Declaring a food insecurity an emergency here in Mississauga certainly has drawn some attention to the issue. We've had some larger donations in the last few weeks, and we're working with some of our peers in other locations across Ontario to also declare an emergency in their communities. And our hope is that by doing this in multiple places across the province, it puts more pressure on the provincial government to act and address some of those root causes of poverty, which is what drives food bank use in the first place.
Well, Canada Helps also notes the ongoing Canada Post strike is hampering monetary donations that they would normally receive by mail.
It's 5:59, and you're watching Toronto's Breaking News CP24.
Thank you for watching. CTV News at 6 is next.